If you're so unhappy, then go. Brittany said it without even looking up from her phone. Her voice wasn't angry. It wasn't emotional. It was casual, almost bored. Like she was commenting on the weather instead of ending a 5-year relationship. We were standing in the kitchen of our apartment in Denver, and the silence that followed her sentence felt heavier than the argument that had led to it. I remember staring at her for a moment, waiting for her to soften the statement, waiting for the usual follow-up people give when they say something harsh in the middle of a fight. But it never came. She just kept scrolling through her messages with that same small smile she'd been wearing for weeks. A month earlier, I probably would have pushed back. I would have tried to explain how I felt, why things had been bothering me, why it seemed like our relationship had started slipping through my fingers. But something inside me had changed. Instead of arguing, I just nodded once. "Okay," I said. Brittany finally looked up, her eyebrows lifting slightly like she had expected resistance. For a second she studied my face, almost like she was trying to figure out if I was being sarcastic. Then she shrugged. "Good," she muttered, "because I'm not changing how I live my life." She grabbed her purse off the counter, checked her phone again, and walked toward the door. "Oh, and don't wait up," she added casually. Then the door closed behind her. And just like that, the apartment went completely quiet. The strange thing about that moment is that it didn't feel like a sudden explosion. It felt like the end of something that had been slowly cracking for months. If I'm being honest, the signs had been there for a while. Brittany had always been social. When we first started dating, that was one of the things I liked about her. She had this energy that pulled people in. She could walk into a room and somehow end up talking to everyone. But recently, that energy had started pointing somewhere else. There were more nights out than usual. More girls' nights. More vague plans that lasted until 2 or 3 in the morning. And whenever I asked about them, the answers were always short. Just drinks. Just hanging out. Just catching up with friends. Nothing technically suspicious. But something still felt off. Then there was the phone. Before all this started, Brittany treated her phone like any normal person. She'd leave it on the table, toss it on the couch, forget it in the kitchen while we watched TV. Now it was practically glued to her hand. The screen always tilted away when I walked by. Notifications got cleared instantly. And if she happened to be smiling at a message when I entered the room, the screen would lock before I could even see who it was from. At first I ignored it. Everyone deserves privacy. That's what I told myself. But then one name started popping up more and more often. Kyle. Apparently Kyle was a guy from her gym. At least, that's how she described him the first time. "Yeah, Kyle says that spin class on Thursdays is brutal," she'd mentioned one night while we were eating dinner. Then a few days later, Kyle recommended this smoothie place near the gym. Then later that week, Kyle thinks the new trainer there is terrible. The weird part wasn't that she mentioned him. It was how casually his name started appearing in conversations. Like he'd quietly inserted himself into our relationship without ever actually meeting me. One evening about 2 weeks before the argument, I walked into the living room and caught Brittany laughing at her phone. It wasn't a polite laugh. It was the kind people make when they're enjoying a private joke. She immediately locked the screen when she saw me. "Who's that?" I asked. "No one," she said quickly. Then she stood up and walked toward the bedroom. That moment stuck with me. Not because of what she said, but because of how fast she said it. After that, the late nights started happening more often. Sometimes she'd text me around midnight saying she was staying out longer. Sometimes she wouldn't text at all. And when she came home, she'd walk in quietly, like she was hoping I'd already be asleep. A few times she smelled like perfume that wasn't the one she usually wore. Once she came home laughing at something on her phone again, then immediately stopped when she saw me on the couch. Little things. None of them dramatic enough to accuse someone of cheating, but enough to make the apartment feel different. Like I was living with someone who had already emotionally checked out. Which brings us back to that night. After Brittany left the apartment around 9, the place felt emptier than usual. I sat on the couch for a while staring at the dark TV screen. Every now and then I glanced at the door, expecting to hear her keys. But midnight came and went. Then 1 in the morning. By 2, I realized something strange. I wasn't actually waiting for her. I was thinking about what she'd said. If you're so unhappy, then go. The more I replayed it in my head, the more I realized something important. She hadn't said it in anger. She'd said it like a fact. Like she believed there was no chance I'd actually do it. Around 2:30 in the morning, Brittany finally came home. She kicked off her heels near the door, tossed her purse onto the chair, and walked past me like I was part of the furniture. "You're still up?" she asked. "Yeah," I said. She shrugged. "Well, don't wait up next time." Then she disappeared into the bedroom. Within minutes, the apartment was quiet again. She had fallen asleep almost instantly. But I didn't. I sat there in the dark kitchen listening to the silence. And somewhere around 3 in the morning, something inside me finally clicked. She had given me a choice. She just didn't think I'd take it. So I stood up, walked into the bedroom quietly, and started packing. The first thing I noticed was the quiet. Not the peaceful kind. The wrong kind. Brittany woke up around 8 in the morning like she usually did on Saturdays. The sunlight coming through the blinds cut across the bedroom floor, and for a few seconds everything probably felt normal. Then she opened the closet. Half the hangers were empty. My jackets were gone. My shoes weren't under the rack anymore. The suitcase that used to sit in the corner was missing too. At first, she probably thought I'd just gone somewhere early. Maybe work. Maybe the gym. But then she walked into the living room. That's when it started to sink in. My laptop bag wasn't on the chair. My keys weren't on the little dish near the door. Even the charger that was always plugged into the outlet by the couch was gone. The apartment didn't look destroyed or messy. It just looked lighter, like someone had quietly erased part of the room. Then she saw the note. It was sitting on the kitchen table exactly where I left it. Brittany stared at it for a moment before picking it up. "You told me if I was unhappy, I could leave. So I did. Ethan." For a few seconds, she probably thought it was a joke. Brittany always had a habit of assuming things would eventually go back to normal. Every argument we'd ever had ended the same way. We'd cool off, talk it out, and keep going like nothing happened. So the first message she sent me that morning wasn't angry. It was confused. "Brittany, where are you?" I saw it about an hour later. By that time, I was already 200 miles away. I had driven out of Denver before sunrise, heading west through the mountains with no real destination in mind. The road had been almost empty, the kind of quiet highway where you can hear nothing but the tires and the wind. When my phone buzzed in the cup holder, I glanced at the screen. I didn't answer. A few minutes later, another message appeared. "Brittany, did you seriously leave?" Then another. "Brittany, Ethan, stop being dramatic." I almost laughed when I read that one. Dramatic. After everything that had happened over the past few months, the quiet act of leaving was apparently the dramatic part. I still didn't respond. Back in Denver, Brittany's confusion was starting to shift into something else. She called me around 9. I let it ring. Then again at 9:30. And again a few minutes later. By 10 in the morning, the texts started coming faster. "Brittany, where did you go? Are you coming back? This isn't funny." Then the tone changed. "You actually moved your stuff? You seriously did this while I was asleep? You're unbelievable." I pulled into a gas station somewhere outside a small mountain town and finally turned the car off. The air was cold, quiet. For the first time in weeks, my chest didn't feel tight. I checked my phone again. 7 missed calls. 12 messages. I put the phone back in my pocket and walked inside to buy coffee. I wasn't ready to talk yet. Back at the apartment, Brittany had started pacing. She walked from the bedroom to the living room and back again, looking around like the place itself might explain what had just happened. The strange thing was that nothing in the apartment had actually changed except me being gone. Her furniture was still there. Her clothes were still hanging in the closet. Her makeup and hair products were still covering the bathroom counter. But the space felt different, because for the first time since she'd moved in, she was the only one living there. Around 11, she finally called someone else. Her best friend, Melissa. "Hey," Brittany said the second Melissa answered. Ethan's being ridiculous. What happened? He left. Left where? I don't know, Brittany snapped. He packed all his stuff while I was asleep and disappeared. There was a pause on the other end of the phone. Wait, Melissa said slowly. You mean he actually left the apartment? Yes. Brittany started talking faster now, frustration creeping into her voice. He wrote this stupid note like he's proving some kind of point. All because we had a fight. What kind of fight? Melissa asked. Brittany hesitated. Well, I told him if he didn't like how I live my life he could leave. Another pause. And he did, Melissa said. Yeah. Melissa let out a small breath. Well, I mean you did say it. That's not the point, Brittany said quickly. People say things in arguments all the time. He knows I didn't mean literally leave. But the problem was that I had taken it literally. And that realization was starting to bother her more than she wanted to admit. Around noon I finally checked my phone again. There were 23 messages now. And the tone had shifted again. The anger was fading. Confusion was creeping in. Brittany, okay, seriously, where are you? Can you at least answer me? This is getting weird. You didn't quit your job or something, right? Then the last one. Are you actually not coming back? I stared at that message for a while. It was the first one that sounded less like an accusation and more like a realization. For the first time, Brittany was considering the possibility that this wasn't a temporary stunt. That maybe I hadn't left to prove a point. Maybe I had just left. I locked my phone again and looked out at the mountains. The air smelled like pine and cold stone. And for the first time in months, the silence around me didn't feel uncomfortable. Felt peaceful. Back in Denver, Brittany was starting to feel the opposite. The apartment that had always been noisy. Music, conversations, the sound of two people living together, was now completely quiet. No TV in the living room. No voice from the kitchen. No one asking what she wanted for dinner. Just silence. By mid-afternoon she called again. This time I answered. Ethan, she said immediately. Where are you? Out of town. What do you mean out of town? She demanded. When are you coming back? There was a short pause. Then I said the sentence she wasn't expecting. I'm not. The silence on the other end of the phone lasted almost 5 seconds. Then Brittany laughed. Not a happy laugh. A nervous one. Okay, she said. Seriously, stop messing around. I'm not messing around. You left because we had an argument, she said. People do that sometimes. They cool off and come back. That's not why I left. Then why? She asked. I thought about it for a moment. Because you told me to. Another long silence. Then Brittany said something quietly. You weren't supposed to actually do it. And for the first time since the conversation started, I realized something. She hadn't given me an ultimatum. She had given me a test. She just never expected me to pass it. You weren't supposed to actually do it. Brittany said the sentence quietly, like she had just realized something important far too late. I leaned back against the hood of my car, staring out at the mountains across the highway. The air was cold and sharp, the kind that clears your head whether you want it to or not. You told me to leave, I said calmly. That's not what I meant, she replied quickly. People always say that after an ultimatum fails. What did you mean then? I asked. There was a pause. I meant, if you were unhappy with how I live my life, maybe we shouldn't be together, she said. That sounds exactly like what you said. Ethan, stop twisting my words. I'm not twisting anything. Another long silence stretched between us. I could almost hear her pacing in the apartment again. Finally, she exhaled sharply. So what now? She asked. You're just gone. Yes. You didn't even talk to me first. We did talk, I said. You just didn't like the outcome. That irritated her. You're acting like I broke up with you. You told me to leave. I was angry, and I listened. That seemed to hit her harder than anything else I'd said so far. Because Brittany wasn't used to consequences. She was used to reactions, arguments, defensiveness, apologies. not quiet compliance. Are you seriously ending a 5-year relationship over one sentence? She demanded. I thought about that for a moment. Then I said the truth. It wasn't one sentence. She didn't respond, but I could feel the tension through the phone, because she knew exactly what I meant. The next few days were strange. For me, things felt calmer. I stayed with an old college friend named Mark who lived outside Salt Lake City. I hadn't planned it that way originally, but once I started driving west that morning, it made sense. Mark had a spare room and a job opening at the company he worked for. When I showed up at his door that first evening, he stared at my suitcase and raised an eyebrow. You didn't even call, he said. Last-minute decision. He leaned against the doorframe. You break up with Brittany? Something like that. Mark studied my face for a moment. Then he stepped aside and let me in. Well, he said, good timing. My roommate just moved out. Sometimes life opens a door exactly when another one closes. Back in Denver, Brittany's experience was the opposite. The apartment felt different without me there. At first she tried to treat the situation like a temporary cooling-off period. She told people we had a small fight. She told Melissa I'd overreacted. She told a couple of coworkers that I'd gone on a dramatic road trip to clear my head. But by the third day, even she started realizing something. I wasn't calling. I wasn't texting. I wasn't asking when we could talk. The silence was starting to feel permanent. That's when she reached out again. Her message came through late one evening. Brittany, are you really moving to Utah? I read it while sitting on Mark's balcony overlooking the city lights. Took me a while to answer. Finally, I typed one word. Yes. 3 dots appeared almost immediately, then disappeared, then appeared again. Brittany, so that's it. I thought about how to respond. Eventually I wrote, you told me to leave. This time she called instead of texting. I hesitated before answering. Ethan, she said the second I picked up. You're being ridiculous. How? You moved states because of an argument. No, I said calmly. I moved because the relationship was already over. That's not true, isn't it? Her breathing changed slightly, like she was getting ready to argue again. Look, things have been stressful lately, she said. Work has been crazy. I've been going out more. Maybe we both said things we didn't mean. I waited. Then I asked the question that had been sitting in my head for weeks. How's Kyle? Silence. Not confusion. Not denial. Just silence. Why would you ask that? She said carefully. You mentioned him a lot. He's just someone from the gym, right? You think I left you for him? She asked. I think you were already halfway out the door. That's not fair. Maybe, I said, but it's honest. After that call, something changed. Brittany stopped pretending everything was normal. She started texting more often, sometimes angry, sometimes emotional, sometimes nostalgic. She sent photos from old vacations, inside jokes from years earlier, messages like, remember when we got lost in Vegas? Remember the cabin trip with your parents? But every time I responded, I kept it simple, short, calm, distant. And the more I did that, the more frustrated she became. Because Brittany was used to controlling the emotional tempo of the relationship. She knew how to escalate arguments, how to shift blame, how to turn a conversation into a debate she could win. But silence? Silence was something she couldn't argue with. A week after I left Denver, she finally asked the question she'd been avoiding. Are you seeing someone else? She asked during one of our phone calls. No. Then why are you acting like this? Like what? Like you don't care. I leaned back in the chair on Mark's balcony. The city lights flickered in the distance. I cared for a long time, I said. Then what changed? I thought about the late nights, the secretive phone messages, the dismissive tone in her voice the night she told me to leave. Finally, I answered honestly. You stopped respecting me. The line went quiet again. Then Brittany said something very softly. I didn't think you'd actually go. And that sentence told me everything. She hadn't meant the ultimatum, but she had meant the attitude behind it. She thought I would stay no matter what. And now that I hadn't, she didn't know what to do next. But the real turning point came 2 weeks later. Because that's when Brittany finally saw Kyle outside the gym. And realized something about the life she had been drifting toward. It wasn't nearly as solid as she thought. And for the first time since I left Denver, she was the one starting to feel alone. For the first couple of weeks after I left Denver, Brittany tried to convince herself that nothing had really changed. At least, that's what our mutual friends later told me. At first, she treated the whole situation like a temporary break. When people asked where I was, she shrugged and said things like, "Ethan's just taking some time to cool off." Or, "He'll be back once he stops being dramatic." That explanation worked for about 3 days. After that, people started asking more specific questions. Why did he leave in the middle of the night? Did something happen? Did you two break up? Brittany didn't have a clear answer for any of those. Because the truth sounded worse than the story she was trying to tell. The truth was simple. She told me to leave. And I did. Meanwhile, my life in Salt Lake City started settling into something surprisingly normal. Mark's spare room turned into a temporary home almost overnight. He worked for a small logistics company that had been looking for another operations manager. And within a week, I had an interview lined up. 2 weeks later, I had the job. The work wasn't glamorous, but it was stable. And more importantly, it was quiet. No tension when I walked through the door at night. No wondering where someone was at midnight. No awkward conversations about why a guy named Kyle kept appearing in casual conversation. Just work, dinner, and the kind of calm routine I hadn't realized I'd been missing. Back in Denver, Brittany's situation was getting more complicated. About 2 weeks after I left, she finally ran into Kyle outside the gym. She had mentioned him so many times during the last few months of our relationship that his name had practically become background noise in our conversations. But the reality of him turned out to be different, at least according to Brittany's friend Melissa. Apparently Brittany spotted him in the parking lot after a workout and walked over with a smile. "Hey stranger," she said. Kyle looked up from his phone and seemed surprised to see her. "Oh hey," he said. They talked for a couple minutes. Nothing unusual. Just small talk about the gym and a few jokes about a brutal spin class they'd both attended. Then Brittany did something she hadn't done before. She mentioned that I had moved out. Melissa later told me Brittany described it like this. "I just said Ethan and I were going through some stuff and he left town." Kyle nodded. "Oh," he said. "That's asterisk CKs. Then he said something Brittany hadn't expected. "Well, I hope you guys figure it out." That was it. No flirting. No sudden invitation to grab dinner. No dramatic moment where the two of them finally acknowledged some hidden connection. Just a polite response from someone who apparently didn't see the situation the same way Brittany had imagined it. The conversation lasted another minute or two. Then Kyle waved goodbye and walked to his car. And just like that, the mysterious guy who had been living rent-free in Brittany's conversations for months drove away without a second thought. Later that night, Brittany called Melissa. "You know what's weird?" she said. "What?" "I think Ethan thought I was leaving him for Kyle." Melissa was quiet for a moment. "Were you?" "No," Brittany said quickly. Then she hesitated. "I mean, not exactly." "Not exactly?" Melissa repeated. Brittany sighed. "I just liked the attention, okay?" Kyle was fun to talk to. Ethan had been so serious lately. Melissa didn't sound convinced. "So you basically pushed your boyfriend away because another guy was entertaining?" "That's not what happened," Brittany said defensively. But even she didn't sound certain. Around the same time, Brittany started noticing something else. The apartment felt different. When we lived together, the place had always been full of noise. The TV in the background. Music playing while we cooked. Random conversations about work or weekend plans. Now the silence was constant. At first Brittany filled it with distractions. She went out with friends more often. Stayed late at bars. Posted photos online that made it look like she was having the time of her life. But the truth was that every time she came home, the apartment reminded her of something. Half the closet was empty. The second toothbrush was gone. The coffee mugs we used every morning were now sitting untouched in the cabinet. Little reminders of a life that had quietly disappeared overnight. 3 weeks after I left Denver, Brittany finally asked the question she'd been avoiding. She called me late one evening. When I answered, her voice sounded different, less confident. "Ethan," she said, "can I ask you something?" "Sure. Are you happy?" The question caught me off guard. I looked around Mark's balcony. The city lights of Salt Lake stretched out across the valley. The air smelled like rain and pine. "Yeah," I said honestly. "I think I am." She was quiet for a few seconds. Then she asked another question. "Do you miss me?" That one took longer to answer. Not because I didn't know the truth, but because I wanted to be fair. "I miss who you used to be," I said. She didn't respond right away. When she finally spoke, her voice was softer. "I didn't think you'd actually leave. You said I could." "I know," she said. "I just didn't think you meant it." That sentence hung in the air between us. And for the first time since our breakup, Brittany sounded unsure. Not angry, not defensive, just uncertain. Over the next month, life kept moving. My new job settled into a steady routine. I made a few friends through Mark, started exploring the city, hiking the nearby mountains, figuring out what my new life looked like. And slowly, the chaos of the last year started fading into the background. Meanwhile, Brittany's situation in Denver was going the opposite direction. The excitement of her new freedom wore off faster than she expected. Cal never reached out again. The friends she'd been partying with started drifting back to their own lives. And the apartment that once felt lively started feeling more and more empty. Which is why, about 3 months after I left Denver, Brittany finally did something she never would have done before. She booked a flight to Salt Lake City, because for the first time since she told me to leave, she realized I might never come back. 3 months after I left Denver, Brittany was sitting alone in the same apartment where she had told me to go. The place looked almost exactly the same. Same couch, same kitchen table, same view from the living room window. But it didn't feel the same. That was the problem. At first, the quiet had felt temporary, like the calm after an argument, like things would eventually slide back into place the way they always had before. Except they didn't. The first week without me had felt like freedom. The second week had felt like space. By the third week, the apartment started feeling empty. And by the end of the second month, the silence was loud enough that Brittany started noticing every little detail that used to belong to 2 people instead of 1. The missing jackets in the closet, the empty side of the bed, the coffee maker that now only brewed 1 cup every morning. Those small things add up in ways people don't expect. Because when someone disappears quietly, they take more than their belongings with them. They take the rhythm of the life you had built together. Brittany tried to fill that space the same way she had filled every uncomfortable moment before. She went out more. Happy hours, weekend parties, girls' nights that stretched past midnight. For a while it worked. Photos online made it look like she was having the time of her life. Bright lights, loud music, groups of friends smiling into their phones. But real life is quieter than social media. And eventually the pattern started repeating. Friends had work in the morning. People left early. The bars closed. And Brittany always ended up walking back into the same silent apartment. Alone. Cal, meanwhile, had disappeared from the story completely. After that brief conversation in the gym parking lot, he never texted her. Never invited her out. Never followed up with anything remotely personal. Eventually Brittany realized something uncomfortable. Cal had never been flirting with her. He had just been friendly. All the attention she thought meant something had actually meant nothing. Which meant the guy she had spent months talking about wasn't even part of the situation anymore. Around the same time, Brittany started noticing another change. Her friends stopped asking about me. Not in a dramatic way, just gradually. At first people asked, "How are things with Ethan?" Then it turned into, "So, you two still not talking?" Eventually it became silence. The subject faded out of conversations. because everyone around her had quietly accepted something Brittany hadn't yet. The relationship was over. 3 months after I left Denver, Brittany finally called Melissa again. They met for coffee at a small cafe downtown. Melissa listened while Brittany explained how things had been going. Or rather, how they hadn't been going. "He seems completely fine," Brittany said, stirring her drink without looking up. "What do you mean?" Melissa asked. "He got a job out there. He's made friends. He's hiking and doing all this outdoor stuff." "How do you know that?" "I checked his Instagram." Melissa raised an eyebrow. "You two don't even follow each other anymore." Brittany hesitated. "I looked through Mark's account." Melissa leaned back in her chair. "Brittany, that's stalking." "I was just curious." "Sure." They sat there quietly for a moment. Then Melissa asked the question Brittany had been avoiding. "Do you miss him?" Brittany didn't answer right away. Instead, she stared out the cafe window at people walking down the street. "I thought he'd come back," she said eventually. "Why?" "Because he always stayed before." Melissa nodded slowly. "Well, you also never told him to leave before." That sentence stuck with Brittany longer than she expected. Because it was true. Every other argument in their 5-year relationship had followed the same pattern. Fight, cool down, talk it out, move on. But this time something had broken in a different way. And the more Brittany thought about it, the more she realized something uncomfortable. Ethan hadn't exploded. He hadn't yelled. He hadn't demanded apologies or explanations. He had just listened, then left. A few days later, Brittany opened her laptop and searched for flights. At first it felt like a ridiculous idea. Flying to another state just to talk to someone? But the longer she stared at the screen, the more it made sense. Because every phone call with me had felt incomplete. Every conversation ended the same way. Calm, distant, polite, like two strangers discussing a business arrangement. Not like two people who had spent 5 years building a life together. Eventually she found a cheap flight to Salt Lake City. It left on Friday evening. Before she could overthink it, Brittany clicked book. Meanwhile, my life had moved into something steady. The new job was going well. Mark and I had fallen into an easy routine of work, dinner, and the occasional weekend hiking trip. For the first time in a long time, my days felt predictable, peaceful, which is why the text I received on Thursday evening caught me completely off guard. My phone buzzed while I was finishing dinner. I picked it up and saw Brittany's name. I hadn't heard from her in almost 2 weeks. The message was short. "Brittany, can we talk tomorrow?" I stared at the screen for a moment. Then I replied, "Sure." 3 dots appeared. Then the next message came through. "Brittany, I'm flying to Salt Lake." For the first time in months, my calm routine paused. I read the message again. Then a third one appeared. "Brittany, I think we need to talk in person." I set the phone down on the table. Across from me, Mark noticed my expression. "Everything okay?" he asked. I nodded slowly. "Brittany's coming to town." Mark whistled quietly. "Well," he said, leaning back in his chair, "this should be interesting." And for the first time since I left Denver, I realized the story between us might not be finished yet. But it definitely wasn't going to end the way Brittany expected. Brittany landed in Salt Lake City the next afternoon. When she texted that she had arrived, I suggested a small coffee shop near downtown. Neutral territory. No memories attached. When she walked in, I almost didn't recognize her. Not physically, she looked the same, but the confidence she used to carry was gone. "Hey," she said quietly. "Hey." For a moment, neither of us sat down. Brittany looked at me like she was trying to measure the distance between the person she remembered and the one standing in front of her. "I didn't think you'd actually build a life here," she admitted. "I didn't think you meant what you said either," I replied. She nodded slowly. "I've had a lot of time to think," she said. "And I realize I messed up." I didn't interrupt. "I thought you'd fight for me," she continued. "I thought you'd stay." "I did fight," I said calmly. "For 5 years." The silence that followed was heavier than any argument we'd ever had. And Brittany finally understood something. This wasn't a conversation about fixing the past. It was about accepting that it was already over. We talked for another 20 minutes, but the direction of the conversation never really changed. Brittany apologized. More than once. She admitted she had taken the relationship for granted. That she liked the attention from other people. That she never believed I would actually walk away. "I thought you'd always be there," she said. "That was the problem," I answered. For the first time, she didn't argue. Instead, she just nodded. "So, there's no chance?" she asked quietly. I shook my head. "Not anymore." The strange part was that I didn't feel angry when I said it. Just certain. Brittany looked down at the table for a long moment before standing up. "I guess this is what you meant about consequences," she said softly. I didn't respond. She gave a small, sad smile. "Take care of yourself, Ethan. You too." Then she walked out of the cafe and disappeared into the afternoon crowd. And that was the last time I ever saw her. Sometimes the loudest revenge isn't revenge at all. It's simply moving on.